Hello friends, for today's video I'm going to be doing a June TBR, and it's been a little bit since I've done a TBR simply because I primarily get books from the library these days, and a lot of times I have to try to time when my holds are coming in, and sometimes they come in sooner than expected, sometimes they take a lot longer than expected, and so I've just been giving myself some room to breathe and pick up the stuff as it comes in. But I'm pretty much caught up with everything that I was planning to get around to in the first few months of the year, so now that we are almost halfway through the year, I'm back to doing some TBRs. The first book on the list would be Howl's Moving Castle. I have never read this book, but over on my side channel, Full Meta Analysis, I am working my way through all of the Studio Ghibli movies, and we do in-depth discussion videos, myself, my husband, and some of my friends who also have their own booktube channel, so I'll have them all linked. And it's been so much fun. We've kind of been trying to combine the lesser-known ones with the popular ones. So, for example, we did Totoro, which is really popular, and then The Wind Rises. We kind of grouped those together as far as the timing in which we watched them so that the discussions would be close together. We always usually try to also think about the lighthearted ones and the more serious ones, but regardless, it's finally time for Howl's Moving Castle, which I'm so excited about. I've already seen the movie. I'm going to be rewatching it, but I would like to have the additional context of what happens in the book. And then on top of that, as I said, I've never read the book before, and I've never read anything by Diana Wynne Jones, and I've heard really good things, so I'm really excited to jump into that. There's a few scenes that I've heard are a bit different. I did read Kiki's Delivery Service also around the time of watching that movie, and getting that additional context was a lot of fun. It was a pretty true adaptation as well, with a couple of things tweaked that I don't feel altered the themes or the general tone of the film, or I should say of the original story. I don't think the film changed those things by tweaking a few elements, which I just find nowadays adaptations seem like they don't know what to tweak and what not to in order to fit the medium. But I digress. This is not a video about adaptations. But anyway, so Howl's Moving Castle, planning to jump into that one pretty much right at the beginning of June. Next up is one that I meant to pick up a while ago. It was actually a patron pick. So over on Patreon, I asked my patrons, what are some of your favorite books, either from last year or just in general? And if I hadn't read them, I put them in a little jar, and then I pick out of that jar from time to time, or it's actually a little cup. Not that that is relevant or matters at all. But anyway, so I had drawn the book Medusa as one of the patron picks, and I requested it at my library, and they had to purchase a copy. If you don't know, some libraries you can actually request things and they'll purchase it if they don't have it at all, or they don't have it in the general city of libraries in your area. So they did get it, but then just because you request something doesn't mean that you immediately, when it comes in, have it on hold. So somebody else had it for so long, which is completely fine because I'm guilty of that too. But regardless, it finally came in, so I now can finally get around to Medusa. It's quite short, and I don't know too much about it. I mean, obviously the name Medusa, there's some indications there, but otherwise I don't know a whole lot about the story, and I like keeping it that way. If I don't already know something, I try not to look into it too much, just because I don't want my expectations to be misplaced, or to have the inevitable, if something's really hyped, then you go in and the idea is that it's going to be the most amazing thing, and then it can't really possibly meet that, those sorts of things. So I also like doing vlogs for patron picks, and I like kind of guessing what might be the case with the story and the themes, and then seeing if I'm right or wrong. So I don't know a whole lot about that one, but I am excited about it. Next up, I do know a decent amount about this one because it's a sequel, and I only just recently read the first one, and I really loved it. And so that would be Unbound. This is the second book in the Songs of Chaos series, the first book being Ascendant. I did do a self-pub wrap-up where I talked about it, so I'll have that linked if you'd like to hear more about the first book. But to put it very, very basically, it's basically a boy and his dragon type of story, but I think there are additional things with the world building and the magic that make it so that it doesn't feel like a repeat of stories we've seen before. But I do want to try and jump into the sequel pretty quickly so that it's fresh in my mind. I can continue the series. I do have the third one as well, so if I'm able to pick this one up in the earlier part of June, then I can either start the third one in June as well, or it can be on my July TBR. But there's only 3 books out so far. I know the author is working on the 4th one, so I'm really excited to see how everything progresses with Holt and Ash, because Ash is so cute. Ash is the name of the dragon. And I really enjoyed that first one. So excited to keep going. I also am excited to see how the world opens up, because a lot of the first one, we are kind of just spending a fair amount of time getting to know Holt and the dragon, which I really liked, because I think that really built their relationship and it made you care about them. And there were things that occurred. It's not like that's all the plot was in the first book by any means. But I do want to see how Holt grows into a man, because he's kind of right at that point in his life where he's going from boyhood to manhood, and he's sort of seeing his place in the world, and there's a sense of obligation that he has now that he has to navigate, and I'm excited to see how that goes. I'm trying to be vague on purpose so I don't reveal anything from the first book, but the first book leaves off in a place where I'm like, where are we going to go from here? And I'm excited about it. Next up, we have A Botanical Daughter. This was an anticipated release that seems to be basically like a Frankenstein's monster sort of story, except for you're following 2 individuals who have created, this is a new release, so this is all just from what I've seen in the synopsis. These 2 men create through plants a person, and then there's a lot of high society that has a lot of thoughts and opinions on this, and maybe some people want to steal some of their, I'll call them innovations, inventions, the progression of science, I'll put it that way. And so they're maybe starting to realize that their creation is more sentient than they thought, and then with that comes a lot of other additional questions about the morality of creating such a thing and the responsibility of that. I don't know. It sounds like a lot of fun. It seems like it's going to be a mix of maybe like science fiction and a little bit fantasy, maybe some horror leanings. I don't know. It doesn't sound scary, but it does seem like there's some questions that arise that, or maybe it's more like the questions that arise are more sci-fi leaning and the aesthetic is somewhat horror, but it's not actually scary. I have no idea. We'll find out. I'm excited though. I hope I really like this one. Next up, we have City of Stardust. This is one that I believe I will be getting from my library very soon. As far as the audiobook, I obviously have a physical copy. And I might end up having read this by the time this video goes up. Fingers crossed. But similar to what I was saying about Medusa, I don't have a lot of information on this. I definitely looked at the synopsis when I was doing my anticipated releases for the given month that this came out, but then since then, I don't really recall what the synopsis was, and I'm like, you know what, I'm okay with that. I'm okay not remembering, because then I can go into it, again, no expectations, which I'm kind of excited about. Back to some sequels, and then one of these is actually the completion of the trilogy, and that would be The Trials of Empire. I really enjoyed the second book in the series. I already liked the first book, The Justice of Kings, which I always say, if you're curious about that one, you follow a man who is judge, jury, executioner, and detective all in one, and the book really analyzes the cons and pros of having somebody with that much power, and how there's a lot of ambiguity when it comes to the morality of one individual person attaining and holding that amount of power. So I really liked the way in which it explored those questions, but I think it explored it much better. In the second book, you actually don't follow that person as your perspective, but rather his protege named Helena. Helena is somewhat of an idealistic individual. She holds to certain things that she feels are right and wrong. She has her principles, and a lot of that gets questioned. In the second book, there's also a fair amount of very dark things that arise that are more fantasy horror leaning in that second book, and I've heard the third book really leans into that. I'll see if I end up really liking that shift, or if I'll miss some of the more political elements to the series, because the second book really had a lot of that, and I always like that aspect. I like when people are leading people on wild goose chases, and they're distracting them, and they're scheming, and there's nothing you can do about it, because if you do one thing, it's going to appear a certain way, and so you have to navigate deception, and I really I had so much fun with that in the second book. And the third book, I think it's going to lean into dark magic, essentially, and I am excited, but I just don't know. But I'm very eager to see how this trilogy wraps up. the story is sort of told from present day Helena's perspective, and then she's telling you about what happened. So you're mostly looking at the past. That's sort of your main setting. But because of that setup, there is this looming dread throughout the entirety of the story. So I'm kind of like, what happened? And I look forward to finding that out. Next up, we have Empire of Dirt. I meant to read this earlier in the year, maybe February or March, and just didn't get the chance to get around to it. But this is the sequel to Rise of the Ranger. And similar to The Ascendant and then Unbound, which is the second book, these are both second books in self-published series. So I also talk about this one a little bit in that self-pub wrap-up if you're interested in hearing more about it. But regardless, this is epic fantasy. It has all of the ingredients of a lot of classic fantasy, but then is doing something really cool with its plot. I really don't know where things are going to go because there's so many moving pieces. And the way in which the first book ends definitely sets up for a lot of different possibilities, and I really want to see where we go from there, especially because it's epic fantasy. I don't want to wait too long to get into the sequel. It was part of why I wanted to read it earlier, and having not gotten the chance before, I definitely want to remedy that and get around to it sooner rather than later. Next up, we have The Familiar. I was hoping to read this pretty much right when it came out, but I did not, so I'm planning on reading it in June. This is, as I'm sure most of you know, because this was on a lot of people's anticipated releases, or it was one of the top anticipated releases for this year for fantasy. It's Leigh Bardugo's new work. A lot of people love Leigh Bardugo. It is, I think, kind of historical fantasy. I really do like her Grishaverse. I didn't love the King of Scars duology. I read the first one, loved the first half, really didn't like the second half, and then I DNF'd the second one. But otherwise, I enjoy the Grishaverse. I liked aspects of Ninth House, but in its entirety, I didn't really care for it enough to continue on. It's one of those stories I'm like, maybe I would give the series another chance someday, but I'm not really in a rush to do that. However, I am eager to find a Leigh Bardugo adult fantasy that I really like, so I'm really looking forward to this one because obviously Ninth House is our current only option for her works as adult fantasy, so I'm really excited that we now have something else because I really think she could do it so well because she explores, especially in the Six of Crows duology, she explores character backstories and she dissects trauma and how it impacts a person and how it affects their behavior. She does all of that so well in that duology, and I would love to see that in an adult work as well. So I think there's a good chance that I'll really like this one, but we'll see. And then last, just throwing this out there, I'm planning to pick up the next Yona of the Dawn volume. I do talk about manga primarily over on that side channel where I also talk about the Studio Ghibli films. But Yona of the Dawn, volume 41, just plan to get around to this one at some point this month. And I might have, I think there's another manga volume of something coming out soon. Is it Witch Hat? I think the next Witch Hat is coming out soon. I think it comes out in June? I think it might literally come out in June. I could be wrong about that, but whenever the next Witch Hat comes out, Witch Hat Atelier is the full name, I'll be reading that as well. But anyway, that's it for my June TBR. Feel free to let me know what you're hoping to get around to in the month of June without giving away spoilers, of course. What were your thoughts? If you've read any of the things I've mentioned, what were your thoughts on them? But anyway, thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.